roommate moved out, I couldn't afford the rent alone. So I advertised the spare room online. A man named Daniel came to view the place. He seemed polite, quiet, had a steady job, good references. He told me he'd think about it. The next morning he texted saying he'd found somewhere else. No problem. A few weeks later, strange things started happening. Someone knocked on my apartment door every night. Exactly 2 a.m. One knock, nothing else. By the time I reached the peephole, the hallway was empty. It continued for 12 nights. I finally stayed awake with the lights off. At exactly 2 o'clock, knock, I rushed to the door. No one. Then I realized something. The elevator doors were closing. Someone had left just seconds earlier. Building management checked the security cameras. Strangely, there was no footage from 1:55 to 2:05. Every single night. They assumed the cameras were malfunctioning. Then I noticed someone had started leaving tiny objects outside my door. A coin, a chess piece, a marble, an old key. Always one item. Always after the knock. Police told me it wasn't enough to investigate. Weeks passed. One evening I got home from work and immediately knew someone had been inside. Nothing was stolen, but the apartment smelled different, almost like fresh laundry. My bed had been remade. The pillows looked fluffier. The towels in the bathroom had been folded. I lived alone. I hadn't done any of it. I changed every lock, installed cameras, bought an alarm. 3 nights later, the alarm went off. Police arrived in under 5 minutes. No forced entry, no broken windows, nothing. But one officer noticed something unusual. The closet in the spare bedroom seemed much deeper than it should have been. Behind the back wall was a narrow maintenance passage connecting several apartments. Someone had removed the panel months earlier. Inside they found blankets, food wrappers, a camping lantern, and a notebook. The notebook described me in disturbing detail. What time I showered, what TV shows I watched, the songs I sang while cooking, the names of my relatives after hearing me talk on the phone. Tucked into the back cover was a printed email. It was my original advertisement looking for a roommate. The detective asked whether I'd ever met anyone who replied to it, but didn't move in. I immediately remembered Daniel. Police searched the email account he'd used. It was fake. The references were fake. The job was fake. Even the name was fake. The only reason he'd answered my ad was to see the layout of my apartment. He'd discovered the maintenance passage during the viewing. From that day on, he'd been secretly living inside the walls, listening, watching, waiting for me to leave before entering my apartment. They never identified him. I moved into another building across town. For nearly a year, everything was normal. Then one afternoon, I opened my mailbox. Inside was an old brass key, the same one that had been left outside my apartment months before. Attached to it was a note written in neat handwriting. It said only 4 words. Wrong apartment this time. When I bought my house, everyone told me I'd gotten lucky. It was a quiet neighborhood, tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, hardly any crime. For the first few months, everything was perfect. Then I started noticing someone walking past my house every night. Not unusual by itself. People walk their dogs all the time. But this person never had a dog, never carried a phone, never looked around. They'd simply walk slowly past my house, stop for just a second, then continue. Every night, always around 11:45. I only noticed because my living room faced the street, and I usually watched TV before bed. Eventually, I started expecting them. One night, I decided to wave. The figure stopped. For several seconds, they stood perfectly still beneath the streetlight. Then they slowly raised one hand and waved back. I smiled awkwardly. The next evening, they walked past again. Only this time, they stopped a little longer. The night after that, they stood directly in front of my house for almost 2 minutes. Then they left. Something about it made my skin crawl. I installed a Ring camera. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Then, on the 4th night, I got a notification. Motion detected. I opened the live feed. No one was outside. But as I replayed the recording, I realized the motion hadn't happened in front of my house. Someone had walked through my backyard. The camera had only caught the edge of a dark figure disappearing around the side of my garage. Police searched the property, but found nothing except muddy footprints leading into the woods behind my fence. The officer suggested it might have been teenagers. I wanted to believe him. A week later, I woke up to my bedroom curtains being slightly open. I always closed them completely before sleeping. I convinced myself I'd forgotten. Then I noticed fingerprints on the outside of the glass. They were fresh. Someone had been standing inches away from where I slept. I bought more cameras. Front yard, backyard, driveway, garage. The footage became stranger every week. Sometimes a figure appeared at the very edge of the camera frame, never close enough to identify. Sometimes I'd receive motion alerts, but nothing would appear on the recordings. Then one Saturday morning, my neighbor asked me an odd question. "Who was the guy in your backyard last night?" I told him nobody had been there. He looked confused. "I saw someone with a flashlight walking around your house around 3 in the morning." My cameras hadn't captured anyone. I checked them anyway. Every camera went offline between 2:58 and 3:09 a.m. Every single one. The manufacturer couldn't explain it. A few nights later, I heard something metallic outside. I looked through my upstairs window. Nothing. Then I noticed my reflection. Behind my reflection, standing in the hallway outside my bedroom, was someone else. I spun around. The hallway was empty. I searched every room with a baseball bat. Nothing. But when I returned upstairs, the attic hatch was hanging open. I knew it had been closed. Police came immediately. An officer climbed into the attic. Within seconds, he shouted, "Get everyone outside!" They found a small living area hidden beneath the insulation. Blankets, food, flashlights, phone chargers, a folding chair positioned directly above my bedroom. There were dozens of tiny drilled holes through the ceiling insulation. Not large enough for me to notice, just big enough for someone to watch me. The officer also found a cardboard box. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. Some showed me gardening, some through my bedroom window, some taken while I slept. The oldest photo was dated 11 months before I bought the house. The detective believed whoever had been living up there had watched the previous owner too. Then he turned over the final photograph. It had been taken only 2 nights earlier. It showed me standing in my hallway, looking toward the attic hatch. The picture had been taken from behind me, from inside my own house. They never found the person who had been living there. I sold the house 3 months later. The new owners contacted me 6 months after moving in. They asked if I'd ever figured out why someone kept walking past the house every night at exactly 11:45. Every morning before work, I'd stop at the same coffee shop. Without fail, there would already be a black SUV parked across the street. I didn't think much of it. Lots of people have routines. But then I noticed something strange. Whenever I left earlier than usual, the SUV was already there. Whenever I was running late, it was still already there. No matter what time I arrived, it had somehow beaten me. After a month, I began recognizing the driver. A man in his 40s, short hair, baseball cap, never drinking coffee, never leaving the vehicle, just watching. One morning, I decided to test him. Instead of going to work, I drove in the opposite direction. The SUV pulled out seconds later. Every turn I made, he made. I suddenly turned into a crowded supermarket parking lot. He drove right past without stopping. For a second, I thought I'd imagined everything. Then my phone buzzed. Nice try. I nearly dropped it. The number was blocked. Over the following weeks, I started receiving messages before I even reached places. Enjoy the movie. Busy gym tonight. Don't buy the chicken. Every message arrived before I'd made the decision myself. I became paranoid. I changed my schedule, changed my route, changed my gym. Nothing worked. Eventually, I took 2 weeks off work without telling anyone. I stayed inside almost the entire time. On the final day, I opened my mailbox. Inside was a small envelope. There was no note, only a flash drive. The police watched the contents with me. The video showed me sleeping, night after night. Different camera angles, different dates. Some clips were filmed from outside my bedroom window. Others were filmed from inside my bedroom. The detective quietly asked one question. Has anyone besides you ever had a key? I remembered the previous tenant had never returned one. Police tracked him down. He admitted losing the spare key years earlier. It had never been recovered. Whoever found it had apparently kept it and waited. I've always been obsessive about where I leave my things. My keys go on the hook by the front door. My wallet sits on the kitchen counter. My shoes line up perfectly beside the mat. One Monday morning, I noticed my keys weren't hanging on the hook. They were on the coffee table. I figured I was just tired. The next day, my wallet was on the dining table instead of the counter. Again, I blamed myself. Over the next few weeks, little things kept changing. A kitchen chair would be pulled out just a few inches. The TV remote would be facing the opposite direction. My bathroom cabinet would be slightly open. Nothing valuable was ever taken. Nothing was ever broken. It was almost like someone wanted me to notice. I bought a cheap indoor camera and pointed it toward my living room. The first 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, I checked the footage before leaving for work. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the camera glitched. The screen turned to static for almost 6 minutes. When the picture returned, one of my dining chairs had been moved. I assumed the camera was faulty. The following night it happened again. Static. 6 minutes. Another object had moved. This continued for nearly 2 weeks. I replaced the camera with a more expensive one. The new camera glitched at exactly the same time. Always 3:17. Always for 6 minutes. Frustrated, I stayed awake one night. At 3:16, I sat silently on my couch with every light off. Nothing happened. Then my bedroom door slowly creaked open. I knew I hadn't opened it. I grabbed a baseball bat and walked toward it. The room was empty. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around. No one. The footsteps continued. Above me. There was an attic hatch in my hallway. I had lived there for almost 3 years and had never opened it. The next morning, I called my landlord. When he climbed into the attic, he immediately shouted for me to stay downstairs. Police arrived within minutes. Inside the attic, they found blankets, food wrappers, empty water bottles, and dozens of tiny holes drilled through the ceiling. Each one lined up perfectly above my bed, couch, kitchen table, and shower. Someone had been watching me from above for months. They also found a notebook. Every page described my daily routine. The final page simply read, "Tonight, I almost touched him." No one was ever arrested. I still wake up some nights staring at my ceiling, wondering if someone else is looking back. I used to think I was imagining things. Every morning before work, I'd see the same man standing across the street from my apartment. He never looked at his phone, never smoked, never seemed to be waiting for anyone. He just stood there, wearing a dark jacket, staring in my direction. After about a week, I convinced myself he was waiting for a bus. Then I started seeing him in other places. He was outside the grocery store when I finished shopping, sitting alone at a coffee shop I had never visited before, standing at the far end of a bookstore while pretending to read a magazine. Every time I noticed him, he'd calmly walk away. I told my friends, but they laughed and said I was watching too many crime documentaries. One night, I got home late after working overtime. As I walked toward my apartment building, I noticed fresh, muddy footprints leading up the stairwell. I lived on the 3rd floor. The footprints stopped at my door. My stomach dropped. Nothing looked disturbed, so I unlocked the door anyway. Everything seemed normal, except my bedroom window was open. I was sure I'd closed it that morning. I searched every room but found no one. The police checked too, but couldn't find any signs of forced entry. The officer suggested someone may have climbed through the fire escape. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I found a Polaroid picture taped to my front door. It showed me sleeping. It had been taken from inside my bedroom. I moved into a hotel immediately. Police dusted the photo for fingerprints, but found nothing. Over the next week, they searched security cameras around my building. Eventually, they spotted the man in the dark jacket entering my apartment building at 2:13 a.m. The strange part? He never came back out. Police searched every apartment. Nothing. Then maintenance unlocked a small storage room in the basement. Inside, they found blankets, bottled water, canned food, and dozens of photographs of me. Some were taken through my windows. Some were taken inside my apartment. There was also a notebook. Every page listed where I'd been every single day for almost 8 months. The last entry simply read, "She knows now."